This is not so much of a rhetorical question. Who broke the world? Why are we talking about a 2-degree or a 3-degree future and the kind of harm that we're going to need to protect each other from? Because the government sure as hell is not. So we're going to try and answer that question. I'm also going to speed run a 40-minute presentation into 8 minutes. You ready? Go. This is based on some work that we did with the Australian Democracy Network a couple of years ago on the phenomenon of state capture, which exists along the slide between influence to corruption, something a little bit less than outright oligarchy. There's this place in the middle called state capture where it doesn't matter who you vote for, the gas industry will still have the numbers after the election. There are good people in Parliament, there are good people, right through all institutions in this country and around the world, but at the moment we don't have the numbers, and this is how they've managed to do that over the years. What is state capture, and what are we going to do about it? So this is going back a couple of years, we mapped the actual entities, the institutions, the advertising companies, the political parties, the PR companies, the peak bodies, and the astroturf groups and the sleazy little think tanks, and that's what I want to speak about mostly this afternoon. That domain coloured red there is where the capture kind of happens of our institutions. It's dangerous. If you capture a state, you can begin to capture its judiciary, its police forces, and turn what are meant to be protective institutions against land defenders and against people who are trying to look after country. So it is very dangerous, and this is where we're talking about. Mostly today I just want to talk about the think tanks and the influence groups, not so much the peak bodies, because they do tend to wear their politics a little more on their sleeve. Here, this is Steve Bannon. This is the disinformation summary. The way to deal with the media is to flood the zone with shit. Here's a quick example of how that was done during the referendum campaign. Whatever side you came down on that, Advance, one of these nasty little attack groups, flooded the zone with shit. They're ripping off Robbie Thorpe and Celeste Little on one hand, saying the voice to Parliament's no good, it's not enough, it's not ambitious enough for sovereign people. While on the other hand, they're flooding the airwaves with casual racism. That is flooding the zone with shit, and they were very good at it. They won. However, they are not perfect. In the last election campaign, they tried to flood the zone with pro-nuclear propaganda, and they face-planted. It fell real flat. It was a disaster for them. They didn't get their guy elected. And so this is an example that state capture is not flawless or foolproof. So they're there, they're strategic, they learn from their mistakes, which is what we've got to watch now, because what they're doing is picking themselves up, chewing what's left of the moderate flank off the Liberal Party, given up on the Nationals, they're in the pocket, and running campaigns against renewable energy, immigration, which is kind of ironic, and ending welcome to country, remarkable. They're not flawless, and they're not actually very good at election campaign, but we've got to study these guys. When you go through the roster of who runs a thing like Advance, who funds it, who's backed it, you find their ties back, A, to the Liberal and National parties real deeply, but also to a much older constellation of think tanks and influence orgs that have been active in this country literally for decades, since the 1940s, and in turn they tie back to a rather unusual and shadowy group that we're going to start to pull into the light now in the United States called the Atlas Network. So Advance itself, a lot of this work is based on the work of Dr. Jeremy Walker. I don't really have time to give you a heap of references today, but look up that fellow. He's at UTS in Sydney. He's studied this stuff and has provided the basis for it. They are cashed up. $15 million, that's Advance in the last year that we've got numbers for. Most of that's dark money. We have no idea who's funding this thing. Like 7 times more than the fossil fuel industry pumped into the major political parties during the same time period. 7 times more. But we don't know who's funding them, but they're pushing out this really hectic and intense culture war stuff, anti-trans stuff, anti-renewable, anti-union, anti-any form of solidarity, anti-Labor, anti-Green, anti-crossbench. They're a hate group, and they're extremely cashed up. They're really quite vicious. And we've got to think of them as part of an archipelago or part of an ecosystem, because they don't act. Advance by itself would be a joke, but it's not, because it works in conjunction with these think tanks, political parties, not just the Murdoch press, but the other kind of right-wing broadcast platforms, and they're cashed up. They're funded not necessarily by ASX 200 companies, but by local oligarchs, okay? People like Gina Reinhart, Palmer's off here doing his own thing, but a bunch of people you might not have heard of. And there's a lot of money flowing through these channels. Think of it as an ecosystem, different functional groups playing different roles. There's not necessarily some central committee of guys with, chomping on cigars, making this devious plan. It doesn't need to work like that. It's very flexible and adaptive organisation. You can't see that because I'm a former graphic designer. Everything I do is over-designed and a lot of it's much too dark. But if you could see it, you would see 6 or 8 of these entities around the country. There's more than 24 of them. Pick these ones out because they're affiliates of a thing based in Washington, DC called the Atlas Network. Fast show of hands, who's heard of the Atlas Network? That makes me so happy. I reckon if we'd called on that one 12 months ago, would have been less hands. So something's working. Advance is a question mark. We don't know if it's a formal affiliate or not because they stopped publishing who is, but there's more than 560 of these things scattered around the world. 2 in Wellington, in Aotearoa, 6 or 7 here that we know of, hundreds in the United States, Latin America, Eastern Europe, right around the world, pumping brain poison into friendly media channels. And this is going to be where we get to real speed run. In 5 quick chapters, where did this damn thing come from? How does it work? There's 40 of these things in Washington, D.C. You also can't see that slide, which is a real shame. Where does it come from? 1, the modern public relations industry, which has got more than 120 years of practice behind it of modern mass psychology to sell you cigarettes, coups, wars, and carbon. It's old. It's older than the think tank network. Item 2, the think tank network, including the Institute of Public Affairs, which was founded in Melbourne in 1943. They've had a lot of practice. They were founded by the mining industry, the Murdoch Press, and a bunch of local oligarchs, and they're still going. This is what it looks like modern day. Gina funding friendly political parties and a bunch of other creeps and weirdos to poison our politics. It's how we ended up where we are. 3, neoliberal ideology. Don't have time to go into this. You're going to think I'm a fruitcake. Look up a thing called the Mont Pelerin Society, M-O-N-T, Pelerin Society. Weird had their first meeting in 1947. Members of the MPS are salted throughout all of these 560-odd influence orgs right around the world. They pop up all over the place. Janet Albrechtsen. 4, a master plan, a manifesto, a strategic plan written by a guy called Lewis Powell in 1971 in the US. He told the Chamber of Commerce what they were going to need to do is be much more aggressive electorally, capture political parties, i.e. the Republicans. They were going to need to build an intellectual cadre, which is where the think tank rollout came from, and create a career pipeline for these chinless spiv economists and other weirdos that they're going to be pushing on TV, capture the media and capture the judiciary. And then they went ahead and did it and built this entire constellation of specialized organizations to do it. And the modern United States is the result. That's where you end up if you execute on what Lewis Powell told them to do in 1971. Deep pockets, but also long-range plans. They don't think short-term. Whatever you might say about capitalists, they're not just looking for the next quarterly report. And so you get this huge explosion in the early 70s of think tanks that still exist. Who's heard of the Heritage Foundation? Oh, this is actually making me real happy. They wrote Ronald Reagan's first policy document back in the very early 80s. They also authored or convened Project 2025 for Donald Trump. This stuff hasn't gone away. They've got a lot of continuity. What's that one? That's the Centre for Independent Studies, forming up in 1976 by one of Rupert Murdoch's people, Santos, BHP. See some familiar logos up there? That's who paid the bills for the Centre for Independent Studies in the 70s. Then they started playing with states. They sent Milton Friedman and the Chicago boys into Chile after the coup in 1973 and broke the place, turned it into an oligarchy. Then they started the same with Margaret Thatcher, who credits the IEA for her success. Then they did the same in the United States. So you kind of get the picture, right? This is the world that we live in, was engineered, it was architected, it hasn't arrived. And then so Fisher, the founder of the Atlas Network, 1981, will set up a think tank to spawn more think tanks, a proliferator. And that's why we live in the world that we do. Responsible for people like Javier Milei in Argentina, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Donald Trump in the United States. And item 5, the fossil fuel industry. This is a graph that was leaked out of Exxon in the early 1980s from scientific work that they were doing, some of the best of the world, in the late 70s, and this is where we live now. They were right. They saw it coming. They've known since the 1950s what they were going to do to us. That report that landed earlier this week that says huge number of us are going to die because of what these guys have done, they walked into it deliberately. They knew what they were doing. They buried the research and stood up this enormous complex of think tanks, donor anonymization schemes, people pumping out public policy and bullshit, and basically have flooded the zone with shit. So much so that we sit here in a climate emergency this afternoon. And so if you thought the 2025 election campaign was a bit Trumpy, you weren't imagining it. They're tied back to these people, and it was a disaster for them. He lost his job. It doesn't always work. Thanks to folk in this room. I've got to wrap up here. So 3 quick pointers as to how this thing works. So 1, when you put it on a campaign footing, the whole network will light up all at the same time and suddenly say, oh, we're all pro-nuclear all at the same time, exactly to coordinate with Peter Dutton's election campaign. Total disaster, but you could see the network pivoting away from the voice to do nukes, and they will have learned from that. 2, as an incubator for young Liberal national people, there's no Labor folk in the graph. 400 odd entities and people. It's an incubator, breeding ground and retirement home for Liberal national politicians. People like Tony Abbott, Maurice Newman, John Howard, folk who have been central to the Liberal national parties over the decades, are deeply embedded in this thing. 3, that is the directors of the Centre for Independent Studies, deeply enmeshed in corporate Australia, from the Reserve Bank, Clean Energy Finance Corporation, etc., etc. You get the picture. What are we going to do about it? Monkey wrench the shit out of it. This is now an emergency. Like, whether you're in a suit and tie, if you're in Parliament, if you're doing the corporate stuff, whatever it is, where we are here today, Pete Wish-Wilson in the Senate just got a Senate inquiry that will run until at least February on who is funding and pumping the climate denialism into our collective mind stream and conversation. So whatever it is that you're into, there's a place for it, even if you're up here with your arm in a pipe or wherever you are, funding people, doing legal protection, research, whatever it is, have at it. It's an emergency. We need all hands on deck right now. Look up Dr. Jeremy Walker. Just Google the damn Atlas Network. I've used up my 8 minutes. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, so thanks. It's great to be involved with this. That's terrifying, all of that, the things that Scott's talking about, and fantastic work. That, I guess I would say, though, that's part of a broader sort of state capture apparatus, because you've got all the, I'd say, more garden variety lobbyists that flood Canberra, the corporate media who run all these lines, and social media and PR campaigns and ubiquitous advertising campaigns, etc., that have managed to kind of capture our democracy, if you like. So there's been a huge ramp up of this sort of state capture project by the fossil fuel industry recently, but we shouldn't be at all surprised that it's happening, because we've fairly recently picked a fight with one of the most powerful, most profitable industries in the world, and they're absolutely going to fight back. It's a great thing that we've picked that fight, because these corporations are an absolutely massive threat to us all, and it's a good sign that they're fighting back so hard, because it means they feel threatened. So the fight's on. I put this map up because it's basically all the fossil fuel extraction licences across Australia, exploration and production and the rest of it. And I've just put it up to sort of explain how I see the structural problem behind all of this. Our governments and bureaucrats have handed out hundreds of these licences all over Australia, like popcorn. And every time they've done that, they've created a massive vested interest, because some well-funded corporation owns that licence, and they can potentially make millions or billions or tens of billions of dollars out of getting that into production. So they have a massive incentive to lobby the hell, advertise, put as much pressure on our elected representatives as possible to get their projects approved. It's an inbuilt incentive, a structural incentive that's creating this whole issue. And these corporations have worked out long ago how to get our elected representatives to do exactly what they want. With their lobbying, their control of corporate media, their ubiquitous advertising and all the rest of it, they've basically hijacked our democracy. But the point I want to make is that their power is almost entirely built on their economic narrative, because nobody wants a gas field for its own sake. Their social licence entirely rests on their economic claims. But the good news is, in my view, that it's a house of cards. Other industries have real power. Manufacturing industry employs almost 1 million people in Australia, right? That is real power, real economic power. The iron ore industry, it has, there's a whole lot of issues with the iron ore industry, but it definitely pays a lot of tax and royalties, and that gives it real economic weight. But the gas industry is all bluster. They export 80% of our gas, which undermines our energy security. They get most of that gas for free. They've never paid PRRT on the gas they export, and many of them pay no corporate tax. They also price gouge us for our own gas. They're a tiny employer, and they crowd out other industries. In my view, it's fair to say that gas exports from Australia are an economic disaster for Australia. I see it as a bit of a Wizard of Oz thing, right? They have to keep peddling really hard to keep the smoke and mirrors show going, of their economic narrative going, to maintain their power. The lobbying, the massive ad campaigns, all their glove puppets in corporate media being fed their lines, all the rest of it is actually a massive effort. And they can always outspend us I think there's a tipping point where people just stop believing them. And no matter how much money they spend, it's kind of like the Qantas example or the banks. It reached a certain point and nobody believed their bullshit anymore. Everybody knew that they're a bunch of grifters, right? And I think we can reach that point with the gas industry, and it can get it to the point potentially where politicians don't want to be seen as their minions anymore. Some examples of this. All right, here's a billboard you've probably all seen at Canberra Airport. I've done a few edits to it because they're saying $20.9 billion of tax from the oil and gas industry. Well, none of that comes from the Northern Territory because Santos and Impex are complete bludgers who contribute virtually nothing to Australia or the NT. Impex, for instance, pay no royalties. They get all the gas for free. They pay no petroleum resource rent tax. They pay virtually no corporate tax, and yet they're still massive whingers. Santos Limited, their main entity, have paid no tax for most of the last decade on about $40 billion worth of income. And Darwin LNG has paid a bit of tax, but last year, 2023, the last year we've got any data for, they paid no corporate tax and no PRRT. In terms of jobs, the gas industry is a very small employer. The 99.3% of Territorians don't work for the gas industry. The health industry employs 20 times more people than the gas industry in the Northern Territory, and education 15 times more. But you never hear these industries banging on about how many jobs they create like the gas industry does, because they actually do employ a lot of people. If we frack vast areas of the Territory, will it solve our financial problems with royalties? Because fracking will pay royalties because it's onshore. Well, no. According to the best case scenario from the Northern Territory government's own commissioned modelling, at best, fracking vast areas of the Territory would increase the budget by about 2%. How much royalties do we get out of gas in the Northern Territory? What I don't want to do is suggest everyone starts talking about putting everything in the economics frame, right? The things you're all passionate about are the most important things. The climate, country, justice, fairness, all of these core values are the things that everybody should talk about. My purpose here today is just to give you some hopefully useful things that give you confidence to say when you're talking to people that we get virtually nothing out of the gas industry. In fact, it's a bit of a blight on Australia economically, and punch back those things that are really the basis of the gas industry's power. Finally, I just want to say in terms of disinformation, yeah, all those think tanks are utterly toxic and have done untold damage. But in my view, the most insidious climate disinformation is when governments talk about meeting 1.5 and action on climate change and looking after our Pacific neighbours and all the rest of it, and do the complete opposite and approve massive new gas projects like North West Shelf, which is going to have more emissions than all of Australia's coal power stations. The emissions are there in the short columns there. That's the emissions of Woodside's North West Shelf down the bottom and Scarborough up the top, the annual emissions. So when our governments say, oh, we're doing a bunch of stuff on renewables, and then they go and approve that, right, that is climate disinformation, right? It's insidious. At least the tinfoil hat guys are kind of upfront about what they believe. But we're really being deceived by our governments. Thank you.
I feel like some energy here. You're starting to feel like you want to go out and get arrested. I can just feel it. You're angry. You're incandescent with rage. If you're not, you should be. So before you do that, have a listen to Julia Griggs. She's from the Climate Defenders Office. She's an award-winning lawyer, Fulbright scholar, 25 years experience in social justice, human rights, through academic, government, and community legal organizations. She's an expert on protest rights, criminalisation and the use of slaps.
Okay, so my name's Julia. I'm a criminal lawyer, not an environmental lawyer, and I'm with Climate Defenders Australia, which is the first legal service to advance and protect the rights of frontline environmental and climate defenders nationwide. We are a new organisation which has a long history in the environmental movement. It all started about 2 decades ago when EDO New South Wales ran a cheeky little side hustle to help protesters who could not access criminal lawyers when they got in trouble. Back then, protesters couldn't get legal aid because they were never charged with offences for which they could go to jail. Imagine that. Or they were otherwise ineligible based on the means test. We operated by word of mouth. If you ever went to a protest and wondered whose mobile number was written on your arm, that was me. One client told me he was going to get my number tattooed on his body. This was possibly the earliest indicator to me of the desperation people felt and the profound need for a service like this. In the time I managed the program there, the landscape literally changed, and it soon became obvious that we needed to do more and we needed to become fully independent to do it. I'm just going to run through some of the events that shaped the organisation that we are today. Some key events happened during that time. We saw devastating and catastrophic climate events like the Black Summer bushfires and the Lismore floods, and with that, an ever-increasing frustration with the government on climate inaction. And at the same time, we saw a sharp uptake in climate-related protests. The backlash for environmental and climate defenders was palpable. Some of the most iconic protests during those years included school strikes for climate, and some of the most typical responses included Prime Minister Morrison urged more learning in schools and less activism. The New South Wales Premier called the strikes grossly irresponsible, and the Education Minister stated it was against the law for students to strike. It's not. Matthias Cormann warned about professional adult activists using and abusing kids in the climate strike movement, and Andrew Wallace compared children's climate anxiety to fear of nuclear annihilation, calling for more school chaplains, because that would help, while others characterised activism as alarmist and suggested it causes mental health problems. There was also the infamous 2019 protest outside of Kirribilli House in response to the bushfires while the Prime Minister was holidaying in Hawaii. The Deputy Prime Minister dismissed the protesters, urging them to stop wasting your time and suggesting they go out and help Meals on Wheels instead. At the same time, we saw groups like Extinction Rebellion flourish, as well as the rise, literally, of the Rising Tide flotilla action in Newcastle. Rising Tide have been described as pests and repeat offenders of creating anarchy on our ports. They have similarly been referred to as numbskulls staging brainwashing events. And there's also the somewhat unimaginative reference to Blockade Australia as blockheads, while one commentator describing the group as having zero intelligence, zero idea, and hating on Australia. While all of this was happening in public view, the rights of defenders was being attacked in less visible ways by all the usual suspects. We saw numerous states introduce anti-protest laws throughout the country, almost 50 laws affecting protest, most of which were introduced in response specifically to climate defenders. We saw counter-terrorism police used for the first time to target defenders, as well as the creation of strike forces to specifically focus on them. We saw arrest rates surge, with Australia now leading the world for arresting climate protesters. We saw police abusing their powers, from imposing unworkable and onerous bail conditions through to conducting widespread raids and the regular seizure of phones and other devices. We also saw the use of preemptive policing, something akin to thought police charging people before any kind of action had taken place. We saw police using novel offences to criminalise conduct, like streaming actions, through to laying charges that carried the harshest of penalties, including the same jail time as murder, all for entirely non-violent and peaceful actions. This was unprecedented. And now, of course, we started to see defenders going to jail. We also saw a well-resourced fossil fuel industry commence legal actions against climate activists individually, as well as environmental charities, in an effort to silence them all, otherwise known as SLAPs, or strategic lawsuits against public participation.
Here to introduce our new law to put an end to peaceful protests in our state. That might sound like a bad law, and civil rights groups, legal experts, even our unions are saying it's a bad law. But here at the South Australian Government, we reflected on it and said, are we out of touch? No, it's the people who are wrong. Introducing the Obstruction of Public Places Bill. If passed, this law will impose cause huge increases in fines and even jail time for obstructing a public place. What constitutes obstructing is super vague. That's because we bashed this bill together in 20 minutes with help from the shit party and rushed it through with no consultation, which means it'll pretty much target anyone. Unions and workers protesting for better pay, students striking for climate action, even someone handing out flyers. We realise this might discourage many of you from attending any protest ever again, but we're here to reassure you that's precisely the intent, which might seem odd coming from a party whose roots lie in the protest movement, but it makes total sense once you realise we're now the party of the oil and gas companies who own our arse. And those companies are really unhappy that some of you sprayed paint on the Santos building and peacefully protested outside a conference where they were discussing how to keep making more money from killing the world. To which we literally told them, we're at your disposal. And to prove it, this guy, who is Santos's bitch, introduced this new law the very next day. But rest assured, it definitely has nothing to do with the fact that Pete's brother works for Santos as head of government relations. Cool and normal. Also, no conflict of interest with Santos sponsoring police cars in this country. Cooler. With this new law, South Australia joins other states that have recently passed laws to punish peaceful protests. Sure, our penalties will be the harshest in Australia, but be grateful because, as this dickhead said, in some countries you'd get your head chopped off for protesting. Visit South Australia, land of freedom, where protesting only gets you bankrupted and jailed for 3 months. If you'd like to support this shitfuckery, please blame the
greeny lefty losers
for inconveniently disrupting traffic instead of the c***s who are killing our mother. We love it when you fight each other instead of us. And if you don't support our new law, well, now would be the time to say fuck this shit and peacefully protest in the streets. Or tomorrow it'll be illegal. This has been a message from the government of Santos, South Australia. Fuck you. Authorised by the Department of the Disposal of Gas Companies.
I guess it's important also to recognise that South Australia is meant to be where COP31 is meant to be held next year. So this is some of the important context for CDA. So reactive criminal defence work was no longer enough, and I started exploring a vision where we could incorporate proactive legal strategies as well, like holding the police to account, and strategic litigation to challenge state overreach. Wins in this regard provide good outcomes for everyone, like the Knitting Nanas case we ran a few years ago, successfully challenging the most repressive parts of the anti-protest laws in New South Wales. I also started to think about how we could use non-legal strategies to counter the damaging narratives about defenders, not just the infantilising and othering language I touched on earlier, but the rhetoric of violence often used in relation to defenders, from Kerry-Ann Kennelly suggesting climate protesters be used as speed humps, to Koshi joking about snipping the lines of an activist hanging from a tripod, to Pauline Hanson encouraging people to take to climate protesters with cattle prods. As movement lawyers, we occupy a privileged position to humanise and elevate the voices of our clients. We should not ever take over the campaign. As lawyers, that is not our role, but we can support defenders and the movement in ways that has not yet been fully realised. With the blessing of EDO and Greenpeace, I started a process of engaging with the movement, which has since culminated in the establishment of a fully independent legal service. Thanks to a handful of incredible supporters, we've now opened our doors for the first time on the 1st of July 2025. Since then, we have already supported defenders in every jurisdiction in Australia. We currently have over 70 active cases in our practice. CDA is a one-stop shop for all the legal needs of defenders and their allies. We are movement-led with specialist expertise to provide a complete wraparound service nationwide to all defenders, climate, environmental, forest, land and sea. We have a small but growing team with access to a very significant network of lawyers and values-aligned organisations, and we still need to scale up for mass mobilisations in the future, like Rising Tide and COP31. CDA now exists to serve the movement, especially some of the most vulnerable and maligned folks in it, at a time when help is needed the most. Thank you.
Next, we've got Antonia Burke. So Antonia Burke is an Indigenous human rights campaigner. She's the founder, director, and lead campaigner of Sea of Nations, working to protect the whole Timor and Arafura Sea from fossil fuel industrialization. Just a really small job there. So please give Antonia a huge welcome.
Thank you so much, Martin. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about our journey in 10 minutes. And when Kirsty asked me to speak about democracy in peril, I was like, hey, what is democracy anyway? So I Googled it, and it says democracy means ruled by the people. The word democracy comes from the ancient Greek words demos and kratos, means the people to rule. I said, perfect, we love ruling everything, so let's do this. And down the bottom it says people have the power to participate in decision making. So I want to change the word democracy just to decision making for this presentation. This is my home here. My mum Trees and I are here representing our family and our community today. This is Pilangimpy on the Tiwi Islands. There's just over 300 people. It's a very sleepy little town and we love it that way. So we're situated right here. I don't know if this has got a pointer. This is us right at the tip of this island here. So we're situated in the Timor Sea. We are neighbours with the Arafura Sea and the Gulf of Carpentaria. And we also share that sea with Timor-Leste, Indonesia, and Papua and New Guinea. So I'm going to tell you about ripple effects of when you decide to do one little thing and take one small action, and how the ripple effect of that creates a movement over here so that we can go over here and do the next ripple and then get everyone working there, and then we move to the next one, and then we look back and go, you're right, okay, good, keep going. We're going to keep moving forward. And this takes a lot of courage, commitment, confidence to challenge the democratic systems at play in this country. So what does democracy mean for us? When we first found out about Santos wanting to drill off the coastline of our home, we saw this map. This is the Commonwealth Marine Parks. The federal government paid for this, paid all the scientists and the amazing people who know how to assess the scientific needs of marine life. So that little green area there is a habitat protection zone. It's a feeding ground for migratory animals, dugongs, turtles, anything that needs to sustain itself. The next one is a national park. Then you have a trawling zone. Then you have a multi-purpose zone. Now, it says you can't even go through on your fishing boat, but you can put a big gas pipeline through it and you can drill just off the coast there. So again, this is our home here, right there, and there's the Barossa site. It's about 130 kilometres from us. So we found out about this. We said, all right, what does it mean for us? And this is the ember, the environment that may be affected by drilling one hole into that little position there. One hole. And every single person that is affected is in that blue line. And if you touch that blue line, it means you are a relevant person or community to be consulted about what they're doing. Those laws don't exist in this country. Australia can do whatever the hell they want on this side of the border. Indonesia and Timor-Leste and Papua New Guinea can do what they want on the other side of the imaginary line, which is that black line there. So all of those little black dots there are wells that have been drilled. And so I sit on the computer at 3 o'clock in the morning and I Google this shit. And the oldest one was 1969. And that 1969 one is right here, right there. So they've been out there drilling without telling anybody, and they didn't have to. Even though it was the law they were supposed to tell people, they just omitted it from the environment plans of all of the mining companies. This is the Timor-Leste side. This is their plan. They've divvied up the whole land and ocean to see what they can do and what they can explore for, and they don't have to tell us even though we're going to be impacted. Indonesia jumped in and said, we'll create. The word abadi means eternal. They're planning on eternal carbon capture and storage. And again, they don't have to tell us. They don't even have to tell Timor-Leste. So that's the landscape we live and work in, right? That's what we've been doing for 4.5 years at my community and I. Democratic decision-making systems that we were faced with were these ones. The government, we had to learn about what the acts were. What does the government say about all of this? So we had to learn that, we had to read it, we had to research it, we had to ask people to help us understand it. Then we had to look at the mining companies, all the resource companies. How do they operate? What are their rules? What are their guidelines? Then we had to go to the environment movement. Well, how does that system work? How does their decision-making work? How does that impact us? Then we had to go to the global finance system and learn all about who pays for this stuff and who makes those decisions. Then we had to look at our own democratic systems in our own communities. So an Aboriginal community with 300 people, we have our own systems because we're running our own towns. We have a councillor sitting right here who makes decisions about everything that we do in our community. And then we had to deal with the democratic systems in our own families. And we know what it does when you oppose something and other people want it to go ahead. So what did we do about it? And what were the ripple effects of every action that we took? And one of my elders said, if we're going to do this and we're going to put ourselves out the front, then let's use this process to educate people about this whole system. So this is what we did. First step, traditional owners took on the South Korean government, and they didn't win. However, K-Shaw, the Korean insurance company, pulled out of financing it after we won our case. Ripple effect 1. Number 2, leaders of this democratic system to the people we voted for listened, but they didn't act. They are listening, but they don't act, right? They hear exactly what we're saying, but they don't act. So we went down to Canberra. We thought, well, if we go to Canberra and we talk to all the politicians, maybe they'll listen and they'll do something. They didn't. They went ahead and ignored us. So then we went to the federal court. Well, maybe if we use their legal system and we bring them out onto Tiwi Islands and bring the judge over there, maybe they'll listen. We won. Of course, everyone knows that story. So we win that case, which means everyone around the whole country has a right to be consulted about what they're doing in the ocean, right? So you can be told about it. Then all of a sudden, the federal government regulator stood down the entire fossil fuel industry for a day to consult them about what our win meant for them and how they need to fix what they're doing. And they spent millions of dollars to rewrite those regulations. That's the ripple effect of us standing up to do something. Then all of a sudden, we found out that there was another offshore project in Cape York, which is Sister Nerida's country over here. So they were ringing up saying, can you come and show us what you did? I said, sure. Here's our strategy, here's our lawyers, here's all our stuff. Go for it, see what you can do. Gulf Energy pulled out. That big lease over there, they have resubmitted an application, but they were ready to spend $62.5 million on that, and we stopped that in 2022. Then the federal government tried to undo our hard work, and the Federal Resource Minister wanted to say that the Environment Minister should no longer be involved in the approval process of a mining company and a mining project. Again, we had to put on our shoes, go down to Canberra, give evidence in the Senate. We won, they didn't get to change it. So that's still in play. Then we challenged the finance system. So this is us with some Gomeroi mob from New South Wales who also have Santos on their country, trying to put in 850 wells. And the Murajuga mob, there's Raylene and Josie from the Australian Conservation Foundation. We submitted human rights complaints, and after we did that, the banks ignored us, so then we jumped on a plane. We went down to all their AGMs and said, why are you ignoring us? And all their shareholders booed them. And then the Westpac CEO said, all right, we'll come and see you. And then the Commonwealth Bank CEO said, I can't come, but let's have a meeting. So we had a one-on-one meeting online with him. He pulled out of the Barossa project. He will not fund Santos anymore. Then another company pulled out, BNP Paribas International Bank. They stopped financing Santos. Then we go back to court and we lose that case. They start calling us liars and saying we manufactured evidence. It's all bullshit. If you want to know the real story, come and see me, but you need 3 hours to listen. So the media starts publishing scary stories saying damning Tiwi Island judgment makes banks wary and the CEOs won't go. Well, there's the Westpac Bank CEO on a boat that we got him onto on the Tiwi Islands. He came and camped with us for a few nights. There's the ANZ CEO that came to Tiwi Islands, took him out on the boat, gave him a spear, made him eat some mud crab. Then the NAB CEO came. He was doing ceremony. They do come when you submit a human rights complaint. Japan. Then we went. Japan ignored us, so we jumped on a plane. We went to Japan, me and Mum Trees and Pitawangi. We met with everyone, and said, the week before that, Madeleine King actually went over there. And then we went in everywhere that she was and said, they don't speak for us, we're sovereign people, so this is the truth. We then did a global action around the world. We went on morning TV shows. Then Jera, who's the 12% owner of Barossa, were like, oh, we need to get out of here. Investor insecurity. They were like, we need to jump out of this sinking ship. And the reasons were the retrospective application of the safeguard mechanism. So keep going with those, those mechanisms that you're putting into Parliament. They are useful sometimes. So Madeleine King goes, we go in after her. Then we go to South Korea, same thing. We met with everyone. They did global actions. Then they were like, oh, these people are too powerful, quickly squash them. So they put my face on the front of the Australian and all the Murdoch media and the NT News calling me a liar, disrespecting a cultural heritage, calling it a serpent and a crock of shit. And they put my home address, my bank account details, and my address on the front page of the paper. So the next day I had to go and get security cameras. And then they removed all of our support network. When this happened, when we lost our case and they started playing dirty with all those tactics that have been talked about, everyone around us got quiet. Every single person around us that was supporting us put their heads down in self-protection mode. And I was told, don't draw any attention to yourself. And my elders said the very next day, Mum Tree said, oh, well, we lost the grand final now. We get up, we dust ourselves off and we keep going. And so I got out of bed. I did national news to face it, was shitting myself. I can't even remember what I said. I haven't watched it again. And I started asking, who's going to turn up with us? Who's going to back us and face this challenge with us? And everyone stayed quiet. So we were left in it on our own, basically. Everyone was like, oh, we're feeling wounded. The environment movement's taken a hit. Well, it's our home that was being drilled. It was our home where the pipeline was. And people should have turned up for us. Now, we've healed all of that and we've mended our relationships because we love the people in this room. Now, we keep going. And I've been told funders only want to fund conservative campaigns and don't talk about litigation because they might not fund you. Well, tell me how many conservative campaigns have stopped multi-billion-dollar mining projects? How many? It requires bold actions and risk-taking. So, Woodside lease, this happened in December. I'm not going to tell you how because our safety and security is at risk, but that big lease there, see this one here? The green one is Barossa. That was a Woodside lease. We got that cancelled in December. It's gone. It's 8,500 square kilometres. This Santos lease here has been cancelled only a few weeks ago. So that one's gone, that one's gone. Now we need to get rid of these ones. And that's what we're about to do. That's what Sea of Nations is. And we're launching next week. Then, because of all of this, Santos wanted to sell the whole sinking ship to Abu Dhabi for $32 billion. Last night it got cancelled. Because who the hell would buy a sinking ship? Up until this moment, we have been independent, we have been sovereign, we haven't been employed by anyone, and we have been operating as community people. And we have been governed by our own democratic system within our own community and our own families. We are creating Sea of Nations to create a level of protection for ourselves so that if Santos decides to come after us, then they can come after Sea of Nations and not me and my family. These are the members that we've got already. These are the countries: Samoa, Niue, Aotearoa, the Saltwater People, Torres Strait Islands, Cape York, Yanua Garawa, that's me, and Tiwi, Timor-Leste, and Latakia. So we are about to launch next week. Please look out for what we're doing. We'll keep you all posted. If democracy means ruled by the people, that means it's ruled by you. Just keep going. Don't put your head down. Don't ever let them stop you from taking action, right? Because you might not want to turn up to a protest, but there's other people who want to lock on, you little weirdos. Just stand in your power. Trust your instincts. If you've made a decision and a campaign and everyone's on board and you're about to do it and you feel like it's not right, don't do it. Trust your instincts, okay? Everyone will understand. And it's you that will suffer, not them. Ignore others' fears and limitations. Protect yourself. Thank you, Julia. We are going to be working with Julia. And stick together. Thank you.